Hello. Okay, today we're going to talk about training our brain to think in English. I'm specifically going to talk to you guys about something that worked for me when I was learning Spanish and really trying to get fluent at the language. So, when I came to Spain, I learned Spanish the traditional way. I went to classes, went back home, did my grammar homework, vocabulary homework, and that's pretty much it. So, when I came to Spain, I spent 3 months doing that. And when I took a level test, I realized that my grammar and vocabulary were somewhere up here, along with my reading and writing. My listening and speaking skills were way lower. So I'm talking about a B1, A2 difference here, and I obviously needed to close that gap that I formed. So I started to think about different ways in which I can get my brain to automatically think in Spanish, which was the language I was learning back at the time, in order to become fluent at the language and have more meaningful conversations. Because what I did, as many others do, is translate directly from my native language to the language that I was learning. And that was getting in the way a lot. All right. So, before I actually get started, I want to talk to you guys. I'll just briefly go over two things. First, the importance, or let's say the benefits, of thinking in English. We're going to shift in and we're going to focus on you guys, okay? So, and I want to talk about how our brains function when we're learning a language, just so that you can understand the dynamics and then see where you can go from here. All right, so when we begin to learn a new language, it's quite normal to translate what we're learning back to our native language in order to make connections and associate them with what we already know. All right, so your brain is always going to look for something to connect that new information to. We want associations, we want to build those connections. And usually the way we do that as adults is I'm learning a new language, I'm going to connect it back to my native language. So we form this dependence, all right? So basically what we have here is at the beginning, that's what you do. It might work well at the beginning. However, as you move on to intermediate English, problems may start to show up because languages are different. They're not the same and they don't function the same way. So that's when you attain, let's say, a certain type of independence with the language at an intermediate level. Okay? We're not confined to the basic conversations we were taught at beginner levels anymore, like talking about the weather or self presentation and all of the small talk that we learn. Okay, so let's say our horizons expand a little bit. Now, we can finally talk about things that we're actually interested in, things that matter, express ourselves much better, and have more valuable conversations in general. All right, so this is what intermediate level starts looking like. And that's great. But there's a point when direct translation from your native language to English starts to become an obstacle. Okay? Because you're not allowing yourself to be fully independent if you're constantly translating. Okay? So, what we've created here, if we keep on translating all the time, is I have to depend on my native language in order to speak the language I'm learning. That is what that connection is creating, right? So you depend on your native language to speak English, and that's what we don't want, okay? The odds are there are many differences in the ways we express ourselves through phrasal verbs, for example, collocations, expressions, things that many times, not always, but many times do not have a direct translation from one language to another, okay? Because we express ourselves in different ways. And some of those ways are derived from our culture or from the roots of that language, okay, which may differ. So, this, I can affirm, is a very common obstacle when it comes to fluency. I've been there myself, not just as an English teacher. I've obviously worked with many students and I've seen it over and over again, but I've experienced it myself firsthand when I was learning Spanish. So take my word for it, as a native English teacher whose main job is to improve the fluency of my Spanish students, translation is a little bit problematic, and it becomes more problematic the higher you go. All right. So in each language, we express ourselves differently. Have you guys ever heard of I think it was a saying, or well, someone quoted this. I can't remember who. That your personality changes a little bit according to the language you're speaking. So this is something that bilinguals, trilinguals, or basically multilinguals, people who speak many languages tend to experience. And I've experienced it too. I want to express myself in English. I want to express myself in a certain way, but if I wanted to say the exact same thing in Spanish or in Arabic, I wouldn't say them the same way. I wouldn't use the same language. My approach would be different. And sometimes the language and the way it is used can, I don't want to say confine you, but it can shape the way you express yourself a little bit, right? So things do differ. The more languages you learn, the more you're going to realize that. So the main goal here is to train your brain to think in English, okay? And this is basically to get rid of the dependence, not the independence, of the dependence on your native language. We don't want them to depend on each other. We want to create an area, well, it's already created for your native language, but we want to create an area for English. And they don't necessarily have to depend on each other. Okay, well, in this case, English is going to depend on your native language. This way, you allow that new personality, let's say, to form, that new part of you, that part of you that expresses yourself in English, how we express ourselves in English naturally. Okay? So it's basically that part of you that will be able to speak English fluently and with confidence because you don't have to translate all of your thoughts and emotions from your native language to English anymore. You can do that in English. So speaking English in general will become a lot easier. And I can guarantee that in my personal experience, it was only when I started to consciously train myself to think in Spanish that my fluency finally skyrocketed. And you can do the same in English. So that's the good thing. Now, something even better than that is actually the fact that the way I did it is weaving it into my routine. Okay, so it's not really, I'm going to make time for this specific, let's say, we're going to say that we're going to be building our skill, our autopilot skill, okay, in English. You're going to be building this skill, all right? And I don't necessarily have to carve out time from my routine in order to practice English or to train myself to think in English. It's something, the way I did it at least, it's something that I actually did throughout my day. My routine was already there. Woke up in the morning, I had classes, I did this, I did that, had lots of things going on. And what I did back then was, okay, I'm going to weave in thinking in Spanish. I'm going to train myself to think in Spanish little by little throughout my day. All right. So this works very well for people who have busy schedules, right? And that's a good thing about it. Um, you can train your brain to think in the language you want to learn without having to carve out specific time for it. Okay. That being said, doesn't mean that you shouldn't carve out time for it. It's just the way that I happen to approach it, okay? Now, bear in mind that I am mainly addressing intermediate to advanced level learners, okay? I don't teach beginner level English. I have in the past, but I don't do that anymore. So most of my live streams are mainly directed to that audience. In case you're wondering, oh, how do I do that at beginner level English? Some things will not overlap. Okay, some things will, but some things won't. The approach is different. And this is something that you should know about languages too. The way that we learn a language at a beginner level changes from beginner to intermediate to advanced. Our approach, the things that are important, the way that we do things, the techniques that you're using, everything should change from one level to another because there are outcomes to each level, and those outcomes change, right? Beginner level English, we're basically building the foundation. It's like the foundation of a house. You're building that foundation so that it's nice, strong, and solid. And then above, we're going to start building our house. How do you want it to look? British English, American English, Australian English. Maybe you don't even care about the accent, but you want English because you're going to use it at work, or you want to have better conversations with the people that you're meeting. Whatever it is, you're going to start building your house, and then you're going to start decorating it and designing it. That's where it becomes more personal. So, this is how languages work, just like building a house. So, when you are already at an intermediate level of English, it's probably a good time to start looking into how you are learning the language. Do you speak often? Do you listen often? Are you only learning the language from a book or a course, or do you go to classes? What skills do you practice often, and which ones do you not? Okay. The ones you don't are obviously the ones that I'm going to be telling you about. We want to focus a little bit more on them because what you focus the most on is going to get better. What you don't focus on is either going to stay where it is if you're maintaining it, or it will drop. And when we have that, we're just going to have a gap between our skills, and we don't want that gap. Okay. So if you are at a B1 level of English, you should be at a B1 speaking, listening, reading, and writing level of English. Okay. That's the ideal situation. And unfortunately, it does vary. Or speaking might drop, or listening might drop, depends on what you're focusing on the most. So if your goal is to become fluent at English, then make sure that you've got speaking well embedded in your routine. Okay. Now, there is no way in which you're going to get good at speaking English without actually speaking the language. Okay, this is the, let's say, very honest, brutal truth here. You cannot pre-program your brain to speak well before you actually start opening your mouth and speaking. Okay? So don't wait until your grammar is perfect, until your vocabulary is fantastic, so that you can actually start speaking and using it in your speech. It's not the same process. You have to start speaking as soon as possible. Ideally, as a beginner, you should start speaking anyways with what you have. All right, and expand little by little. But the sooner you start, the better, definitely. Okay, so let me stop rambling. How do we start thinking in English? In my opinion, the best way is to incorporate it little by little into your daily activities because it feels lighter. It doesn't feel like a burdening task, mainly because it takes time. It takes time to build that English brain that you need in order to speak fluently. It's not going to happen overnight. So, since it takes time, weaving it into your routine is a nice idea because it won't feel like homework that you have to do. Besides, you're probably already doing other things in English, hopefully. Maybe you're reading things, maybe you're reading a book or some articles out there, maybe you're listening to a podcast or whatever you're doing. Hopefully, you're doing some more things. Today, we're going to focus on training our brain to think in the language we're learning, specifically to improve our fluency. Okay, so this is where we're going to put the spotlight. Now, so what this means is that I'm not asking you to make time, sit down, and study English. No. The key here is to be consistent with your practicing. Okay. So I want to become fluent at English. That means that I have to use English every day. All right. And bear in mind that training your brain to think in English is a little bit different than actually speaking the language because you can train your brain to think in English without opening your mouth. While you're sitting on a bus, for example, you can train your brain to think in English without speaking. But if you want to get fluent in English, you're probably going to have to, well, not probably, you're definitely going to have to open your mouth and actually speak. Okay? So don't let training your brain in English eat up the other part. Okay, we want to do both. Obviously, you can do one more than the other, depends on how you are, well, how your routine is. Now, a tiny bit every day is going to do much more. It's going to be much more beneficial than 3 hours on a random Saturday. Okay, so This is something that I always say to my students. Consistency beats intensity. So, intensity is you sitting there for so many hours one day and then forgetting about it for maybe 1 week, 2 weeks, or even months. Okay? Consistency is better because even if you hit English speaking every single day just for 5 minutes or even 3 minutes, if you will still get better. Little by little, you're gonna get better. But it's a lot better than hitting very, very intense sessions that are a little bit sporadic. Okay? Therefore, at the beginning, you're going to anchor your English practice to whatever you do on a daily basis. For instance, chores, cooking, running errands. If you commute to work, that is also something that you can anchor it to whatever it is that you do every day. Okay? So we're going to anchor English to the things that already belong in your routine. We're not going to change your routine here. Now, the first thing you want to do before you do anything is simply create the habit of saying what you're doing in English out loud. So you're basically going to narrate your life to yourself or to anyone else. Doesn't really matter. Okay. Um, so you're going to start narrating your life. Obviously, sometimes we can't speak out loud. Let's say we're in public, we're commuting, we're standing in a queue, whatever it is. There are situations in which you're not going to be able to speak out loud or you prefer not to do so. So you can also say it in your head. That counts as training your brain to speak in English or to think in English. Speaking is the part that you're going to do afterwards. All right. But when you can speak out loud, make sure that you do take advantage of those times. All right, speaking out loud is really important because we're also practicing our pronunciation. Our intonation finally falls in place. Connected speech starts finding its way into your speech too, so that you don't sound really choppy. There are so many different things that are very beneficial, okay? So it's important to speak out loud whenever you can, but whenever you can't, you can still train your brain to think in English. Now, you're not going to improve your actual speaking without opening your mouth. So remember to make time for that. When we speak, we don't only train our brains. We don't only use our brains when we speak. We're also training our tongues and our ears too, because your ears are listening to what you're saying. They're also listening to what other people are saying. Right? So there are many different things that are actually going into our speech that makes our speech good. So might as well start as soon as you can. All right? You're going to start speaking. You're going to make mistakes. You're going to correct them. And you're going to continue improving. That's the process. Unfortunately, there's no way around that process. There's no shortcut. There's no way in which you can start speaking a language and speak it perfectly off the bat. Okay? I thought I was going to get away with that when I was learning Spanish. I was like, oh, my grammar and vocabulary are great. When I start having conversations with people, just watch me. And then you can definitely watch me struggle and get frustrated because I forgot my grammar. My grammar was perfect on paper, but in conversations it didn't really pan out the way I wanted it to. Right. So our brains function a little bit differently when you're speaking and having a conversation with someone. You're under pressure and it's normal for you to make mistakes at the beginning. All right. So we might as well start as soon as possible so that you can get round that area because the first couple of times you practice speaking, they're going to be messy. Yeah. So, but the more you practice, the better you get. Remember that practice makes perfect. Okay? So, the more you practice, the better you get. You're not always going to be making lots of mistakes. So don't beat yourself up during that beginning phase, that initial phase of the process. Okay. Now, besides, if you're a shy person, what's better than practicing a little bit on your own for some time? Because when you practice on your own, solo practicing basically builds your confidence little by little because your brain says, oh, that grammar that I learned in that grammar book, I know how to use it in my speech. I know how to apply it. It might be something very simple, but it's still going to give you that let's say a safety net, nice foundation for you to start from. And then you can build on that foundation. Let's say it's like a head start, yeah? Now, you speak out loud, you make your mistakes, correct them, and you're going to start seeing progress. You're going to start noticing that you're becoming more fluent. Your fluency is improving, which in turn boosts your confidence. So it's a win-win, all right? Now, when you do speak to another person, you'll probably make less mistakes and you'll feel a lot more comfortable using the language if you have already been practicing for a while on your own. This is why it is not 100% necessary to have someone to talk to in order to do your speaking practice sessions. All right? So, I always tell my students, go ahead and run those speaking practice sessions on your own. Don't wait for someone to come. Because the ones who do wait for someone, wait for that opportunity to have a conversation with someone. Now, I'm specifically talking to students who do not live in an English speaking country. So, English conversations do not come up every 2 days, let's say. So, when you do your solo practice, this is your time to slow down. This is your time to focus on your pronunciation, to listen to yourself, to observe how your grammar is going, to observe what kind of vocabulary you're using. Are you using formal English, informal English? Is there anything you want to change with your speech? It's your time to get all that feedback. When we're having conversations, we don't always do that, right? You're focused on getting your thoughts out into words, transmit that information to another person. The goal is different, all right? So make sure that solo practicing is somewhere in your routine, all right? But the first thing that we want to do if you are not used to speaking in English, we want to train our brain to start doing so. We want to train our brain to start thinking in this language. And the only way your brain is going to take this language seriously is by doing it every single day, even if it's just a little bit every single day. All right? So that way, oh, and by the way, that being said, don't avoid conversations in English because I did that when I was learning Spanish. I came to Spain and I was just petrified. Unless it was absolutely necessary, I would not talk to anyone in Spanish. And it was super intimidating. All right, it may be intimidating for you too to speak in English to someone else, but trust me, it's the best way to improve and learn new things. All right, you're going to get feedback, you're going to listen to how that person uses the language, listen to their pronunciation, you're going to observe things, you're going to be immersed in the language, right? So don't be too worried about speaking English badly. Get out there and try. Okay? So don't avoid conversations, don't avoid opportunities to speak in English. Solo practicing does not mean avoid every single conversation that you might have. Solo practicing means when I don't have the opportunity to have a conversation with someone else, I can still practice my speaking on my own and make it better little by little. That's basically what it means, okay? So don't misunderstand me there. Okay? Now, do what suits you best. This is the most important thing. Do what suits you best because in the end, it's not a one size fits all kind of thing. But the most important thing, going back to step number one, which is embedding this habit. If you're not already in the habit of speaking English on a daily basis or using English on a daily basis, then this is going to be fundamental. If you already do, then you can basically skip past this section. All right. Um, but it is really important for you to actually get in the habit of using English on a daily basis. Before you start learning new vocabulary and incorporating it into your speech, before you do anything, you want to get in the habit first. Okay? So let me show you a couple of ways to apply this. What is your morning routine? All right. Talk to me about your morning routine. Do you go to the bathroom, brush your teeth, wash your face? Do you drink water, coffee, tea? Some people make their bed in the morning. So you can already see that there are some there is some English language going into, well, this is English language, but there are some collocations, some phrasal verbs that you're going to use. And we're talking about a routine. We can talk about it in using very basic English, or we can take it up a notch and we can use, let's say, more intermediate or advanced terms to describe a routine, to describe the way we feel about it, to describe different things. All right. So according to your level, you're going to adjust what I'm saying. All right. So we're basically narrating what we're doing. Woke up in the morning. What was the first thing I did? Let's say I went and I made a cup of tea, and then I had a lesson this morning. Okay. So that's basically what you're going to do, right? You're going to either say it out loud. If you can say it out loud, definitely encourage you to do so. If you can't do so, then at least say these sentences, full sentences, important, full sentences in your head. All right. So you're going to narrate your day to yourself. And when you do it in your head, the reason why I asked you to do it in full sentences is because that's the way we speak. I don't want you to go in the kitchen and say, oh, tea, and just walk back out. That is not practicing English. Okay, that's practicing your vocabulary, refreshing your vocab, if you will, but that is not going to get you fluent at the language. We use sentences. Words belong together. All right. So the more sentences you build, the more grammar you're practicing, the more vocabulary you're practicing, the more alternatives you can use. You can just play around with it in many different ways because odds are there is more than one way to say whatever you're doing, whether it's cooking, cleaning, or whatever it is. We can say it very simply, or we can be more specific about these things. So again, according to your level, you're going to adjust this practicing. Sometimes you're going to want to challenge yourself a little bit. Say, okay, I just talked to you about my day, and what I want to do right now is see if I can say it with more advanced level vocabulary, for example. So there are many things that you can actually do with this. And make sure that when we are looking at these things, and again, now we're going back to the basics, right? I'm talking about my routine, I'm talking about my day. Maybe you might want to talk about your work, about sports, if you're into sports, about your hobbies, whatever you're into, right? So we're looking at expressing our preferences, expressing our preferences and talking about our routine. So what I want you to think about are alternatives. You don't have to think about them just yet, but when you walk into the kitchen and you're fixing breakfast, for example, I want you to say, okay, well, I'm making the same breakfast every single day, for instance, and I don't have anything new to say. Well, maybe today you might say one thing, tomorrow, why not explore a different range of vocabulary, explore a different way to say the same thing. This is what we call paraphrasing in English, and it's a it's just an absolutely fantastic skill to develop. Unfortunately, it's not super easy, so we're going to want to develop it little by little. All right. When you paraphrase something, it's basically I have a thought or I feel something and I can say it one way. If I want to paraphrase that thing, it doesn't mean that I'm shortening it or making it longer. What it means is that I'm going to say the exact same thing using different vocab or different grammar or changing the structure. Maybe I started with this phrase and I'm going to put it over here. That is basically what paraphrasing is. And I definitely advise you to work on paraphrasing when you're doing your solo practice. Think of different ways to say what you want to say because it's very convenient, trust me. I've had students that only know how to express their thoughts in one way, and if you talk to someone and they don't understand you, what do you do? How do you express that thought? We need different ways, we need different alternatives. Not just for that case, but also because when we're talking, sometimes we repeat ourselves, right? And many times when we repeat ourselves, especially if we're going back to the same point a lot, what we don't want to do is repeat ourselves with the exact same sentence or sentences that you've been saying. So sometimes we paraphrase to say it differently. Still saying the same thing, I'm emphasizing it, but with different language. All right. So that's the whole point of paraphrasing. I'm going to talk to you guys about paraphrasing more on another live stream because it is a big deal. It is fantastic. But since I'm talking about your routine, and our routines tend to look quite similar from one week to the next, paraphrasing is a nice thing to do here so that you're not saying the exact same thing like a parrot every single day. We're exploring our horizons with our vocab and grammar. We're seeing how far we can go. Is there a better way I can say this? How about making it more formal? How about making it more slang? How would this sound in whatever? Be creative with your speaking practice routines. Okay? Always adjust them though to your objectives with the language. That is very, very important because if you're not working towards your goals, then you're not going to see the progress that you want to see at the end. All right? So, quick tip before we move on, if you are unsure about anything, how anything is said in English, how anything is pronounced in English, look it up. Okay, do yourself a favor and don't repeat things that might be incorrect because it's so much harder to correct those mistakes when you've been saying them for years. And I've had a good bunch of students that have been repeating the same mistakes. It might be incorrect pronunciation, it might be incorrect grammatical structure, it might be whatever it is. Okay, something that one day they had a slight doubt, is this correct? I don't know, I'm probably going to go with this. And maybe at that point they went for the incorrect version and they've basically been repeating it until their brain just stopped asking itself, is this correct or not? This is just the way it is. All right, so that's what happens. So if you do have doubts, so let's say, is it do the bad or is it make the bad? I'm not quite sure what the collocation is. Quick Google search. You'll clear out your doubts and you're going to say it correctly. All right, that way, whenever you repeat it, whenever you need to use it again, you're going to know how to use it. Same goes for pronunciation. As a matter of fact, when it comes to pronunciation, look everything up if you have any doubts because our pronunciation in English is a little bit tricky to figure out sometimes because we don't always follow the rules. We've got many exceptions going on all over the place, so it's better to check the pronunciation of a word before you invent one. All right? Now, that is something that you can just keep in mind. Look everything up. That's the whole point of this because this is the risk that we're running with solo practice. Nobody's going to give you feedback unless you record yourself and you show it to someone or you listen back to it and spot a couple of mistakes. Definitely recommend recording yourself, by the way. I'm going to get to that later. But that's the thing, when we do our solo practice, if you're narrating your day, you're just going through your routine and you're getting by and you're trying to use English. If you do have any doubts, if there's something you're not 100% sure of, how do you say this? Or it sounds a little bit off. Google search it. Definitely would advise you to search it. Maybe so this, mainly so that you can clear out that doubt and not be saying anything that is wrong. All right. So that is the risk that we run with solo practice. So in order to, maybe you're not going to avoid it 100%, but at least eliminate, well, a huge percentage. We want to research things that we're not sure of. All right. That way, when you build your vocabulary, when you build your sentences, you build your pronunciation, everything's going to be good. It's going to sound natural and it's going to, you're basically going to go down the right path because unfortunately correcting mistakes, it is possible. Correcting stubborn mistakes is possible, but it is a process that takes a little bit of time. It takes more time if you've been saying something wrong for a significant amount of time. I actually have a live stream on that here on Twitch. So if you need to correct any of your mistakes or if you want to know how to identify any of the mistakes that you might be making, go ahead and check those out. They are on my Twitch channel. So I'm not going to go over that right now again. Okay, so now step number one is narrating what we're doing. Okay, you're already doing something. in your day, so you might as well say it in English. You don't have to go out of your way just to practice this language. I'm making breakfast. Fantastic. You used some English. I put some bread in the toaster. I'm spreading jam on my toast. Whatever you're doing, say it in English, or at least think about it in English. All right? And remember that at the beginning, it's always going to be, let's say it's the hardest phase. You might have to look things up. You might have to take things slowly. You might have to stop, translate, or even perhaps realize that your vocabulary is too limited to talk about what you want to talk about. All right, so all of these are possibilities that can show up. But that's all right. It's natural, it's very normal. Just do what you need to do, keep it simple, and most importantly, keep practicing. Okay? That is the most important thing. Now, the whole point here is to be consistent, all right? That means that you're going to be practicing every single day as much as you can, okay? As much as you can. The more, the better, okay? But that doesn't mean that you have to go crazy with new vocabulary. It doesn't mean that at this beginning, this first stage, we're not going to look into vocabulary expansion that much. Why? Because if you're not in the habit of speaking English on a daily basis already, you're trying to get that habit down. And if this is so hard for you, one day you're going to slack. The next day, maybe you're going to slack too. And then before you realize it, 2 months have passed by and you haven't even spoken in English at all. Okay? So we want to keep our English practice, the speaking practice, simple at the beginning. When you are already, let's say, oh, I actually speak English every day, you're already comfortable, you don't have to remind yourself, I need to use English today, I need to do this. When it's somewhat in your routine, it feels more natural to you with a little bit less resistance. That is when you can start being creative with, oh, well, let me look for new vocabulary to incorporate. Let me do this, let me do that. That's perfectly fine. Keep it as fun as you want it to be, all right? But just make sure that you are not overcomplicating things at the beginning, because that is going to be the very reason that you just might say, you know what? I don't want to do this anymore. So we're going to keep it simple. That means that when you are narrating your breakfast, we're going to keep it simple, just like the phrases I said to you right now. However, if you've already narrated your breakfast now, let's say for instance your level is a little bit higher, you can do better than I put some bread in the toaster and I spread some jam, right? So maybe you have a higher level and you can do better than that. So what you're going to do is make these tasks more complicated accordingly. All right, so how about instead of saying I'm making a sandwich, let's practice our tenses a little bit. What did you eat yesterday? Yesterday, we're going to use the past tense. I made a chicken sandwich. What about tomorrow? Let's use the future tense. I'll make a peanut butter sandwich. The more specific you are, the better. How about, now we're going up, you can see, right? How about we try using conditionals? How about we try using present perfect or past perfect? Try to incorporate little elements of our grammar in your speech as much as you can, right? If you still do not feel comfortable using those tenses, then we're going to go back, keep it simple, keep it basic, so that you don't have to grab your phone and look for things every single time you want to say something in English. Okay, that's not the point of practicing here. The point is that you have already learned some grammar, you have already learned some vocabulary. It might be a lot if you've already got a higher level. And what we want to do with that grammar and vocabulary that you already know is get it out in our speech. Okay? That's what we're doing in this first stage. That's the whole point. That's the objective. This is why you can keep it as simple or as complicated as you want it to be, according to your level, but not too complicated as for you to actually drop it all together. Okay? Let's say, for instance, oh, let's use some conditionals. If I have strawberries, I'll make myself a smoothie. We're already pushing it up a notch, right? If I hadn't run out of eggs, I would have made an omelette. Another conditional. Okay, so this is how we start incorporating our grammar. I'm not asking you to go back to your grammar book and actually, review your theory. No, we're trying to see how it is applied in real life, how we can use it in our sentences, and we're going to keep it simple at the beginning. Okay, now you can also seize this opportunity to practice new things that you've learned in English. If you are currently learning things on an active, let's say, if you're actively learning things, maybe you're listening to music, maybe you're reading a book, and you're naturally going to come across vocabulary that you have never seen before or grammar that you've never seen before. And if you want to incorporate those into your speaking practice at this stage, you can do that. All right? Because you've already been exposed to that information. What I don't want you to do is go scurrying around and trying to find the perfect way to say what you want to say. Not right now. Okay. Now remember that this stage is going to vary from person to person. Some people will need 1 month in order to get the habit of using English on a daily basis down, to think of things in English. When I see something, I'm going to say, oh, do I know how to say this in English? All right, so some people will take time to get that habit down. Some people take less time to get that habit down. It depends a lot on how you function. All right, so remember that this stage varies. When do you know? Okay, well, now I want to move on to stage number 2. When do we know that we've reached stage number 2? It's when you don't have to constantly remind yourself to say things in English and to use English. Okay, that is when. So if you're wondering about it, that is when. Okay, that means that you're already in the habit. Obviously, I would recommend keeping a streak here so that you can see that you're using English on a frequent basis, but that is up to you. Okay, so if you do learn more vocabulary through whatever you are doing, then obviously feel free to explore that vocabulary that you'd like to use, and they could even be names of things or expressions, whatever it is. Feel free to use those things in your speaking practice, because the sooner you incorporate something that you have just learned from reading and listening into your speech, the more you're going to remember it later. All right, it's a lot easier to do that. Let's say I just read a chapter in my book and oh, I came across this lovely expression that I really want to use in my speech. I think it resonates. All right. So instead of leaving it aside and hoping that one day I will remember to use that expression, odds are you won't, um, especially if you don't come across it again. Okay. So what we can do is take it and use it in our speaking practice sessions. I'm going to use that expression. I'm going to find a context in which that expression can be used, and I'm going to try to talk about it a little bit and naturally weave that expression in. We're going to do that once and again, and eventually all that vocabulary that you are incorporating into your speech will come naturally when you need it. We want things to be nice and available for us when we're speaking, okay? And that's the hardest part. And the way we do that is through repetition and exposure, okay? So if you see a grammatical structure or some element of vocab once and again and again and again, you're naturally going to pick it up. You don't have to put in that effort, okay? You're naturally going to pick it up. But obviously in that case, you're kind of let's say you're hoping that you're going to come across it again and again and again. And many times, especially when it comes to advanced level English, a word might come again, maybe in the next 6 months, maybe in a year. Who knows when it's going to come again? Because things are very, very specific. So if you're very keen on using something that you have learned recently, try to use it in your speaking practice sessions as soon as you can. Okay? Obviously, you can run a little bit of research beforehand, especially if it's just a word or something along those lines that you've learned, so that you know how to use it in a sentence. Does it come with a preposition or not? All of these kinds of things. Where does it come in a sentence? Beginning, middle, or end? All of these questions that your brain is going to ask you, by the way, when you want to use it. So you might as well clear out those doubts. How do we do that? Just look at example sentences with that piece of vocabulary that you've just learned. Okay, if it's a phrasal verb, all right, you've got the verb, you've got the preposition, and you can see how it is placed in a sentence. That is how we function when it comes to putting things in our sentences. Grammatically speaking, we want it to be clear. We want to understand how to use it in order to use it. Okay, if you skip that part, you're either going to be prone to getting it wrong, or if you're lucky, you might get it right. But the thing is that we don't want to just, we don't want to risk it, okay? Now, you can ask yourself lots of questions, honestly, when you are at a more, let's say, higher intermediate to advanced level. Let's say, what do we call it? I'm going back to the kitchen. I don't know why, but just bear with me. You can do this with whatever you want. What do we call it when we put plates, glasses, utensils on the dining table before we eat, right? So let's say you're cooking dinner or lunch and you're going to go to your dining table. You're going to put all of the stuff so that you can basically get ready to eat. What do we call that in English? We call it setting the table, right? We set the table. So that is something that you might think of, oh, this is what I'm doing right now. Instead of saying, I put the plate on the table, which is a lot more basic, we're going to look for something that describes the situation as a whole. Or you can even go more detail. What things are called, what utensils are called, what kind of cutlery you're using. You can go crazy with this, as crazy as you want, obviously. Mostly, the most important thing is to do it in a convenient manner. Okay, if you do like cooking, if you do like, for example, well, if you do like cooking and you have a specific interest there, then you are obviously going to look into, oh, what are these ingredients called? What about the spices that we have? What are these called in English? What about this specific appliance or whatever it is? You're going to go into more detail than a person that is not very keen on cooking and they just want to get over the basics and they want to develop their vocabulary in another area. Okay, so remember that how deep we go depends on you and your preferences. Ideally, we all cover the basics. What comes after the basics is up to you. Okay, how much you learn is up to you. Now, how about, for example, when you've finished eating and you put all the dirty things in the dishwasher? You can say, yeah, I put my stuff in the dishwasher. We say that we load the dishwasher. We load it and unload it. This is also something that you can do when you say something in English. Say, ask yourself, how do I say the opposite? What is the opposite of this action? Or even if it's an emotion, if you're feeling frustrated, what would the opposite look like to you? How would you describe that feeling? So, um, yeah, let's give you guys the same example for some reason. Anyways, let's say, for instance, there's something that, let's say there's an event this weekend and I'm super excited to go to that event. I'm going to say I'm looking forward to it. So when you're just narrating your day, and you can say, oh, I'm really looking forward to this event that I've got this weekend, right? Um, how about the opposite? What if that event is something that you're not looking forward to? You can obviously say that you're not looking forward to it, but let's be a little bit more creative. As you know, in English, we like to exaggerate things too. So let's think of a different way to say, I've got this thing this weekend and I really don't want to go, but I have to. But this feeling in your chest, that heaviness, that, oh, I really don't want to go to that event. That feeling, I can say I'm dreading that event. So many people don't know that. Many people don't know the opposites of situations. And that's another way that you can expand your vocabulary. And the good thing about it, we can do that with phrasal verbs too, by the way. We can do it with many different things. So if you've got a phrasal verb, what would be the opposite phrasal verb that would describe the situation, right? Um, the good thing about this is that you're already making those connections that I talked about. Your brain is already looking for things to connect that new vocabulary to. You already know how to say, I'm looking forward to doing something. Okay, so the new thing for you is the opposite. You're going to directly associate it to something that you know. So this is what we call English to English associations or connections. Because now instead of saying I know this phrase or this vocab in English and I also know it in my native language, which is great in making that association, we're looking for, okay, well, I've got something in English and I'm connecting it to something else in English. It could be its opposite. It could be saying, okay, just learned this phrase in English and I'm going to tell you what it means in simpler terms with my own English. Okay? So that's another way in which we make associations. Try to make sense of things with your own English. And that also, making it easier when you look things up, you're going to look them up in an English dictionary, not English to Spanish, not English to something else. All right, so just English, try to make sense of things. And obviously, again, this is, let's say, more adequate at higher, let's say, intermediate to advanced levels of English. If your English is a little bit lower, then obviously it will be harder to do that, okay? So again, think about what suits you, what suits your level, and take what works for you. Okay? So that's what we do with this. Now those are a few examples that we talked about, but we can also take it up a notch. We all have habits, right? We all, let's say, we're all used to having certain habits, and sometimes we had habits in the past and we lost them over time. Okay, so sometimes we just stop doing things. You can talk about that. You can talk about the habits that you do not do anymore, the habits that you dropped. You can make it long or short. You can do whatever you want with it, right? So talk about them. Um, let's say one sentence, for example. Going back to the kitchen always. Let's say, now I eat avocado toasts for breakfast, but when I was a kid, I used to have scrambled eggs. There, what are we doing? We're comparing the present, what we do right now on a regular basis, to what we used to do, again, on a regular basis in the past. Something that was a habit back then and simply not a habit anymore. Okay, so again, we're playing around with our tenses. We're playing around with phrases like I used to. You don't want to mess it up with I am used to. That is the present. If you are used to doing something, means you are used to doing it right now. I am used to having avocado toast for breakfast. I am used to doing this or that. Okay, but without the am in that sentence, if I just say I used to, that means that it was something that I used to do in the past, not in the present. It stopped somewhere on the way, right? So that's basically what we're saying. So you're playing around with these kinds of sentences. Or what you can do is say a couple of sentences about why you started a habit and why you stopped. So we're going a little bit deeper here. You're going to talk about one specific habit. Let's say reading. Maybe a couple of years ago you used to read a lot, but now you don't. What got you into reading? Was it something that you picked up as a child? Did you get into reading in another way? Were you at I don't know, did you have a reading group, a reading club, anything along those lines? You can talk about that a little bit. Then you can also talk about why you stopped, right? What you love about it, what you hate about it, what's convenient, what isn't. You can even talk about budget. When it comes to reading, you can buy books or you can read stuff online, right? So, how long you've been doing it. There are so many things. Whatever comes to your mind, just talk about it. Nobody's judging you, nobody cares. You're doing this on your own. So, what I don't want you to do is to stop your thought chains, especially at the beginning, because your brain is struggling to get English together and out. So when you have ideas and you're trying to say them, don't be super strict with yourself when it comes to, oh, I said that wrong and I said this wrong, and you keep stopping yourself over and over and over again. Let it flow. Find the momentum. Let it flow, because finding that flow is not easy, right? It happens easier for some people and it's a little bit harder for others. Okay, so it's a little bit subjective, but let your thoughts flow. We can fix things later, especially if you record yourself. Now, this is a fantastic time to talk about this. If you already feel like you can talk about a topic, let's say for 3 minutes straight, okay? I'm going to talk to you guys about a hobby that I have, and I'm going to talk to you about it for 3 minutes. All right. So, what I'm going to do is I'm going to let my thoughts flow. I'm going to say what comes to my mind, and I'm just going to build my monologue, or whatever you want to call it, during those 3 minutes. You don't have to set a timer if you don't want to, by the way. So, the whole point here is to create thought chains. I can move from one idea to the next, to the next. I can branch out. I can come back. We use specific structures to do that in English. So the more you let your brain just do whatever it wants to explore the language, the more you're going to see how good or how bad you are at the language, because you might want to say something that you hadn't intended to say from, when you actually started your speaking practice, and you say, oh, I don't know how to say this. So that is your opportunity to expand your vocabulary horizons or your grammar horizons, whatever it is. Right? That is your opportunity to say, oh, I reached a limit here. I don't know how to say this thing. I don't know how to go into this topic in depth. Whatever it is that you discover, but basically you're going to discover it by getting there. You're not going to discover it beforehand. All right, that's the good thing about speaking. Let's say you just pick one topic, one random topic, and you say, okay, I'm going to start talking about this. You're going to start creating your thought chain. Thought chains is something that I talk a lot about on my live streams. You must be super bored of them. Anyways, thought chains are fantastic. And let me give you a couple of examples just so that you know where we're going with thought chains, because they're super important. You start with one word or a cue. Think of things that are related. Okay. Um, let's say the weather. Okay, I look outside and say, okay, well, the weather is cloudy, it's rainy, it's sunny, it might be cold. Cold, we can associate it to a season, like let's say winter. If it's hot, we might be looking into summer. If the weather is unusual, you can talk about that too. We start talking about seasons. We start talking about, let's say, seasonal activities. In winter, you can go skiing, for example. And you basically keep branching out and see where you go. You can start talking about skiing. Do you love skiing? Have you ever skied before? What about that specific sport? Is it something expensive? Is it something cheap? Is it something? You can talk about so many things. Just let your brain go wherever it needs to go. And that's how you explore how to talk about different topics. And then we also want to practice coming back to our original point. If you want to practice that, it's good to practice that. Okay. Because we branch out a lot, and it's important to know how to wrap things up and go back to the point that you were originally talking about. I'm going to give you another example. Food. Let's talk about food. When I say the word food, what do you think about? Some people might think about their favorite dish. Okay, so food. Oh, this is my favorite dish. You start thinking about the recipe, the ingredients, the utensils, how delicious it is, how it tastes, all of the textures, blah, blah, blah. Or you might think about something else. Let's say, oh, food. Food can be healthy, it can be unhealthy. We have junk food, for example. You can start talking about lifestyle. You can start talking about working out, your routine, how your diet affects your life, blah, blah, blah. Food. You can also name different foods. Let's say, for example, you've got pizza, you've got pasta. You can start thinking about restaurants. You can start thinking about people who work at a restaurant, like waiters and waitresses. You can talk about service. The last restaurant that you visited, for example, are you happy with the service or not? You can talk about the menu. You can talk about the ambience. You can talk about the price. You see where I'm going with this? There are so many different directions just from one cue. And that's what I want you to do here. The idea here is to talk about these things, to branch out, to dive deep in topics. And when you reach a barrier, you can do a little bit of research, gain a little bit of new information, and keep going. Okay? But you're basically exploring where your English can take you. That's what we want to do when we are doing these thought chains. Right? Plus, if you are prepping for an English exam, I highly recommend practicing your thought chains. They are super important. But we're going to talk about exam preparation on a different live stream, yeah? So let's think of other things. I always go back to the kitchen and food for some reason. I'm an absolute foodie. Let's say if you read a lot, for example, what genres do you enjoy reading? Is it fiction, nonfiction, thriller, romance, self-help, technology? Did you read books, magazines, online articles, for example, the newspaper? Do you prefer paperback, hardback, ebooks? There are many different things you can talk about over there. You can talk about advantages or disadvantages of having a physical book in contrast to having one in its digital format, right? And there we can start talking about the economy. We can start talking about many different things. All right, so what I want you to do is explore these topics, and it all comes from that one hobby or that one habit that you used to have or you have already, and it comes from that cue. You see where I'm going with all of that, right? So there are so many things that you can comment on. You can keep it short, you can make it long. The most important thing is to keep practicing. All right, so we're going to follow our thought chains, we're going to build them. If you're struggling with thought chains, if you feel like you just go blank in English, it's nice to have a little piece of paper. Say, okay, today I want to talk about this topic. Okay, let's say we're going to talk about the last restaurant you visited, okay, or the last movie you watched. You're going to put that in the middle, and you're going to start branching out. What kind of topics can we talk about? A movie, we can talk about the plot, we can talk about the cast, we can talk about character development, we can talk about the setting, we can talk about a specific scene, we can talk about how it ended. Does it have a cliffhanger? We can talk about so many things, right? So if you just simply write those things, you're going to create a mind map. It will help your brain say, okay, I ran out of things to say about the plot. Let me move on to the next topic. So it can guide you into, let's say, can structure your speech for you a little bit and give you a couple of hints. And if you really want to take it to another level, you can go ahead and write, oh, there is a good phrasal verb that I can use to talk about this. There's an expression that I can use to talk about that. And when you get there, you have it there on the piece of paper, and you can keep it in mind so that you can try and use it. Right? So there are many different ways in which you can do this. You just have to adapt it and make it find what works for you. All right, that's the most important thing. Find what works for you. There's so many different ways that I have not mentioned. Okay, so just be creative. That's the whole point of actually doing this. Be creative with how you are practicing English and what you're doing with your practicing. The thing is that if you have a clear goal that you're working towards, oh, the light is terrible. I'm sorry. If you have a clear goal that you're working towards, it's so much easier to go in that direction, right? Let's say, for example, you're used to speaking English, but now you want to speak more formal English because you want to get a job in English or you already work in English, right? So we're going to focus on, let's say, the transition of informal speech to formal speech. So you might want to run one round, say whatever you want to say in English and see how it sounds. Does it sound formal? Does it sound professional? Can I fix something? And then you can run a second round with those adjustments, right? So there's so many ways in which you can do it. Now, you don't really have to have a specific goal, especially at the beginning, but if you have a goal, you can work towards it. You don't have to do many random things if you do have a goal, okay? Now, the whole point here is that we're starting with things that are currently in our lives. My routine is my routine. My preferences are my preferences. There are things that I like, there are things that I don't like, there are things that I don't even have an opinion about. There are things that there are things that I do, there are things that I don't do, there are things that I used to do, there are things that I want to do in the future. My interests, my life, my background, my everything. This is where we start. Okay? So if you're wondering, well, what do I start speaking about? Look for something that belongs to you as a person, that makes you unique. Start to talk about yourself. Start to talk about the things that you like. Start to learn how to express your emotions, for example. Express how to say specific things, how to express preference, for instance. Try all of these things, right? There's so many things that you can talk about before actually reaching out and developing your vocab or grammar in a specific area, right? So let's always look at ourselves and our environment to initiate this process, right? To make our speaking practice sessions just a little bit easier, so that there isn't lots of resistance, especially at the beginning. Yeah, the beginning is usually the part that is hardest on this journey. Now, some days you might feel lazy, okay? So, what I want you to do on those days is stick to a bare minimum and say what you're doing, for example, or how your day has gone by, for instance. Let's say I'm ironing my clothes, I'm going to take a shower. We can keep it short, we can keep it simple. It's something that wouldn't take a lot of effort from you to say. Okay? So always have in mind a cue or something that you can do that falls under that, let's say, that is your bare minimum. I'm not feeling motivated today. I don't want to do my English practice. I do not want to talk in English for 5 minutes. I'm overwhelmed, I'm tired, I'm sick, whatever it is. So, what can we do on those days? We have a bare minimum that we can go back to, and it will still count as practicing English today, right? So, if you're keeping a streak, today will count. That's what we're looking for, okay? So, when we do that, you want to set your bare minimum according to your level. If you have a higher level, obviously your bare minimum should be a little bit higher than a beginner level learner, for example, or intermediate English learner. All right, so we want to identify those bare minimums. What is something that I can do in English? So that is something that I can talk about or think about if you're not going to do it out loud. That doesn't really take lots of brain power from me. It doesn't take lots of effort. It doesn't drain me. It isn't really challenging. It's something that I can do. All right. So we're gonna stick to that on the days in which you're just not feeling super motivated or enthusiastic, let's say. All right. So the days we all have our ups and downs. So let's have something for those downs ready in advance so that you can go to. You usually go to narrating what you've done because odds are you've done something during your day and you can talk about that. Or you can talk about how you feel. Maybe you haven't done anything today and you're feeling miserable and upset. You can talk about that. Try to talk about that in English. Just a couple of sentences. Don't overwhelm yourself, but it will still count. The whole point here is to use the language and not skip your English practice sessions. We can make them simpler, but don't skip them. That's the whole point. Otherwise, consistency is not really going to be there, is it? And it's so much harder to kickstart something when you have fully stopped. So let's say I stopped practicing English for 3 days and I want to start again. It's so much harder to do that than to basically get your momentum going when you have been sticking to the bare minimum for a couple of days. So instead of skipping it completely, I just do something that is simple, but I still did it. It counts. Okay? So those are things that you want to keep in consideration. Obviously, there are going to be other days in which you're feeling super motivated and you want to talk more. Go ahead and do that. Whatever you do, maintain your streak until you get in the habit of using English every day. It's going to be harder at the beginning, right? It's the first couple of weeks, the first month. For some people, it's a 2 month period. Depends on you. So, and it also depends on how much effort you're putting into it, right? So if you're actually using English, let's say, more than 5 minutes a day, or just random sentences throughout your day, whatever you do, you just want it to be consistent. Okay? We want that. That is the key. We're, we're not going to be consistent. It's just going to be so much harder for your fluency to actually build. So we want that. All right. So before you jump onto your speaking practice preparation, make sure that you have a go-to for your lower days, for those days when you just really don't feel like it. What is your go-to? I might narrate my day. I'm going to tell you how I feel. I'm going to tell you how my day went. I'm going to tell you what my plans are, for example, for this weekend, if you have any plans, or what you did during the past week. Something is going to change. Odds are something is going to change, hopefully, right? So it's they're cues that you can use this week, then next week, and the week after, and the week after, and your response will be different. Those are the ones that we are talking about, right? So that is what we want to do, and just keep that in mind. Now, I'm going to show you another simple activity you can incorporate into your daily routine, because today we're just going to talk about incorporating things into our daily routine. On our next live stream, we're going to talk about actual techniques that you can use to improve your speech, to improve your fluency. But those techniques require carving a little bit of time out of your routine and dedicating them to English. Okay, today we're just going to talk about things that you can do throughout your day, and that is convenient. let's just put it that way. Now, we want to, well, I've already mentioned this before, but you want to use the things that surround you as cues. All right. If you've got a bag lying nearby, name 3 things that are in that bag. I'm not talking about just naming them. Again, we're going to do them in full sentences. Tell me what's in your bag in full sentences, and try to be creative with it. Don't tell me I have 1, 2, 3 in my bag. Maybe talk about one thing. Why is it in your bag? Because you use it often, for example. Talk about another thing. Oh, I forgot that that was in my bag. Just talk. All right. The whole point here is to build your sentences, to keep it flowing. All right. To look for connections when we need connections, to look for those linking phrases, to look for linking words. Build your sentences and your speech. Okay. Building your vocab or refreshing your vocab is a different thing. When here we're doing both together, and we need sentences in order to become fluent. All right. So when I ask you to tell me 3 things that are in your bag, I don't want you to tell me, oh, I got my keys. What else can you have in your bag? Maybe, like, let's say tissues and your phone. Let's try to put them in sentences so that it's more effective. Yeah. Let's say if you're in your bedroom, name 5 things you have in your bedroom, why they're in your bedroom, how you use them, if you have any preferences about them. I don't know. Be creative with that, right? Name 3 things that are on your shopping list. Talk about the things that are on your shopping list. If sugar is on your shopping list, for example, do you have some sugar in your cupboard, or is it completely out? Did you completely run out of sugar, or are you just low on it? You see how we're using different vocabulary here? You can talk about going to the supermarket. You can talk about how urgent something is. You can talk about the quantities. You can talk about containers. You can talk about so many things, you see? But the whole point is to start becoming a little bit more observant, because especially when we're at home, we're very used to the things that are around us. They're around us all the time, aren't they? So what we want to do is to use these things to start observing things, finding opportunities to practice in a more creative way, so that we can practice in English, right? So that we can say those things in English. And it doesn't just have to be that thing, because maybe I'm looking at my water bottle right now. I'm looking at my water bottle, and I can start talking, okay, I have a water bottle on my desk. I usually keep this water bottle around because I do not remember to drink water if I don't have this thing around me. That is the reason why I started filling my water bottle with water and taking it. I literally take it everywhere with me in the house. Don't take it outside. I have another water bottle for that. So what I want you to do is that I could start rambling about this stupid water bottle for 5 minutes if you let me. So that is what I want you to do. All right. Where did I buy this water bottle? Oh, when did I buy this water bottle? Is this is it even fulfilling its purpose? It's by the way, it's completely full. I haven't even yeah. So it's not fulfilling its purpose just yet. So that is basically what I want you to do, right? You pick one thing, you're going to start talking about it, and hey, if you branch out, if you deroute, that's fine, okay? If you want to stick to whatever you thought about talking about in the beginning, that's also fine. But every now and then, allow yourself to branch out and explore what your brain wants to say and see if you can say it in English, see if you can say it better. So that is basically what we're doing. I want you to also try variations, right, in the ways that you express yourself. Variations so that we can make our speech sound a little bit more like our level. Because many times when we start speaking, especially at lower levels of English, you're going to use the same structures, the same vocabulary over and over and over and over again. And what we want to do when we get up to a, let's say, B1, B2, C1 level of English, we want our speech to reflect that level of vocabulary and grammar that we know. Many times it doesn't. Many times our speech is a little bit lower. So how do we do that? We say something once, and then we stop. Let me look for a better way to say this, a different way to say this, a more detailed way to say this. Let me comment on this topic from this perspective. Let me contrast it. Let me do this. That is how we explore variations. That is how we explore situations in which we can finally use that advanced or upper intermediate vocabulary that you have been learning. All right. Otherwise, some of it will come out in your speech, of course, but many things just don't. And it's because you sometimes need to just take a step back, find situations to use that phrasal verb that you learned, to use that expression that you learned, because the higher you go, the more specific things are. A phrasal verb might only be used in, let's say, 5 different situations. And unless you want to talk about one of those 5 situations, you're not going to use that phrasal verb. See how specific it is? It's not like it's not like one of the simpler phrasal verbs that you will use, that you will learn at beginner level English, right? So that is what we're going into, creating these environments, creating these speeches in which we can incorporate different vocabulary, see how it goes. So this is where our thought chains lead us many times. When you start talking, especially if it's something you're passionate about, or if it's something that you simply have a strong opinion about, right? Even could be the news. And you start talking about it, and you start talking, you're going to rant, or you might even want to vent, for example, if something bad happened. Um, you're going to be talking, and during your speech, you're going to start weaving some of those things in. When you go into specific areas, when we talk about that specific thing, but you're only going to get there by actually letting yourself go into those areas, right? So if you're stuck to a very specific script, then obviously you're just going to be repeating it all the time. So be as creative as you want with this. Remember that sometimes, even if you take just one topic and you thought about 5 points to talk about today regarding this topic, if you just spend 5 minutes talking about one of those points and it just went well, you've got momentum, you're just talking, you're feeling fluent, even if you're making mistakes, it's getting out there, you're getting the information out there, and and you're doing this and you're actually feeling comfortable, that's a good sign. You don't have to do the other 4 if you don't want to, not on the same day. If you want to and you're feeling motivated, go for it. Yeah. But don't interrupt that process. Your brain needs it in order to finally settle into that fluency, right? Now, we can say, let me show you an example of how we look for variations in English. Let's say, for instance, going back to my shopping list, I need to buy eggs, I need to buy butter and milk, okay, from the supermarket. So those are 3 ingredients that I would have in my shopping list. Now that's the main idea, that those three things are on my shopping list and I need to go to the supermarket in order to buy them. All right. But I can express this in several ways, as I said before. When I open the fridge, if I have 0 eggs, I can say I ran out of eggs. There you've got your phrasal verb. I can see that I have a little bit of butter, okay? But I still need more butter. So I can say that I'm low on butter. There's still something. If you need to use it, there's still something. But there isn't a lot, and I need to buy it. That's a different way. It's not the same situation, but it's a different situation falling under the same thing that I was basically looking at my shopping list and say, well, I need to buy these three things from the supermarket. You can see how we have these variations, and here we're adding details. Yeah, you need to buy these three things from the supermarket. That's the main idea. But if I tell you, if I use that phrasal verb, if I use a different phrase, if I use a different verb, all of these things can give you more information that I did not have to spend, like let's say 5 sentences to tell you. All right, so that is basically what we're going into. Of course, you can say, I have to buy butter, I have to buy milk, I have to buy eggs, but sometimes we want to give more information in our sentences without making them too long. So we express ourselves just a little bit differently, right? We use collocations, we use expressions, we use phrasal verbs, we use specific word patterns, we use other things, okay? So make sure that you explore those. Now, the point of this exercise is not to feel like you're limited when you want to express an idea that is in your head, because the whole point here is that, well, nobody likes to repeat themselves 10 times in a minute, okay? If I ask you about your hobbies, for example, and you start saying, I like, 100 times in your speech might sound quite linear. It's not wrong, okay? You can do whatever you want, but it might sound quite linear. It's almost like you don't know any other way to say this, right? It's repetitive. And for the person who's listening to you, it might be a little bit tiring, okay? So that's okay, but sometimes we want to add emotions. We want to express our passion or our anger or whatever it is that you're expressing, and we want to do that better. We do that better when we have these alternatives to choose from. Okay, so we've got different alternatives. I can say, I like basketball, but oh, I'm passionate about tennis. By the way, intonation does a lot. Pay attention to intonation when you're listening to people. It falls in naturally. That's the good thing about intonation. The more exposed you are to the English language, the more you learn about how we intonate things and how we can emphasize something in a sentence just simply by playing around with our intonation. Okay? I can say, I love cooking, simple phrase, but once in a while, I fancy eating out, different, right? So we've got contrast here, all right? Playing songs on the guitar is cool, but I'm really into composing music. I can say like in all of those sentences. I like basketball, I like tennis, I like cooking, I like eating out, I like playing songs on the guitar. I'm really struggling to remember what I said right now. I like composing music. My goodness, that was a list. Okay. So what you want to do is basically look for alternatives because there are different levels of energy when we talk, especially when we're talking now, looking at this specific topic, right? You can like something, you can love something, you can be passionate about something, you can be really into something, you can be keen on something, you can fancy something. They all give different vibes. You don't have to learn all of them, okay? But they all give different vibes. And sometimes when we're speaking, we want to give off a different vibe. We want to give off a different impression. We want to add a little bit of information. If I tell you that I'm really into music, you can deduce that I listen to music a lot. Lots of my time is going to be dedicated to that thing that I'm into, right? So you can probably tell that it forms quite an important part of my routine. I dedicate time to it. It's something that you will probably find me doing every single day. All of that information is what I can draw from that sentence. All right. And the same goes for many different phrases. And it doesn't just have to be about things that you like or dislike, but this is how we explore alternatives. I usually like to put them on a scale of energy. Okay, so let's say, for example, right now I'm happy, which is fine. But if you just walked out of a concert of your favorite band, well, obviously you're going to be happy, but you might have an incredible amount of energy in you at that time, and you might be ecstatic or euphoric. You're going to use another word over here, right? I can also be content, but that doesn't mean the same thing as happy. I can I can be, let's say, I can be joyful. I can be there are many different things that you can say that give off different vibes, right? Different levels of energy. Okay? And it's not just energy. Sometimes it's also intensity and frequency that determines whether you're going to use one word or another. But this is where we start exploring these different levels. This is where we start exploring information that we're giving implicitly. And this is what we explore a lot in, let's say, B2, C1 levels of English, right? That's what makes them so different. Um, so you can express yourself so much better. You can talk about things in so much more detail, and your speech is a lot more colorful and a lot more valuable. And you can say a lot more without having to make your sentences super long or give a whole speech in order to say that thing. That's why we like these variations. Now, it's nice to know how to use them. You don't have to use them every single time, right? But what we do want is to know when to use things so that when we find ourselves in these situations, I find myself in a situation where I'm talking about something and I'm super passionate about it and I really want to get that passion to you, I know what vocabulary to use here. Okay, that's the whole point of this exercise. But we don't always have to do it with positive things. Let's say, for example, you got pissed off at work. You can talk about that, vent a little bit. You can rant. You went to a hotel and the service wasn't good. Learn how to complain about things, for example. Learn how to express anger, disappointment. Learn how to phrase things. So again, here we're going back to our emotions because when we've got emotions, and I think that's probably one of the hardest things to actually do, is to translate your emotions into our words in English and to have it sound natural, obviously. So practice doing those things, right? And use the opportunities that you have. I'm not sure if I should be calling this an opportunity, but if you are frustrated or you're going through some, let's say, negative emotion, let's say take this opportunity to try to do that in English, right? Try to process it or say it in English, see how it goes, especially if you are at a higher level of English. Otherwise, it might frustrate you more. So again, just you know, take things according to your level. Okay, now those are just a few examples, but the more creative you are with the ways in which you're expressing yourself while you're simply practicing on your own, the better you'll express yourself when you're having a real conversation with someone. Okay, because the things you practice the most are the things that you can use off the top of your head. They're the things that stick because we need repetition. We need lots of repetition in order to finally have something so ready for us to use in our speech. Okay, repetition is key. And it doesn't only come from speaking and practicing. All right, repetition also comes from listening and reading. Okay, so we've also got other skills that we're working on. Writing, not to mention writing is very important too. Okay, now because the things you practice the most here, yeah, those are the things that are going to, let's say, fall in your autopilot zone when you're speaking English. Okay, many of us form this, well, everyone that speaks a language fluently has an autopilot zone in that language, right? So whatever you're feeding into that autopilot will only be fed through repetition. I bet, especially if you're at an intermediate or more advanced level of English, you don't have to sit down and think, how do I ask this person, how are you? It comes out naturally, doesn't it? You've said it so many times before. You've heard it so many times before. It's something basic, it's something that you've gone over many times. It doesn't require effort. It's probably in your autopilot. It's not something that you're randomly, well, you're going to start from scratch, okay? So there are already things in there. We just want to make it a little bit better, okay? We want to add more things. So the whole point is for that English vocabulary and all that grammar that you're learning, we don't want it to be back there with all the dust on it, buried under piles of other vocabulary and other grammar that you've learned and never ever used. What we're looking for here is to have all of that stuff that we are gaining through our listening, through our reading, and we want to have it in our active memory. Somewhere our brain can use them in our speech. Okay? This is why it's so different when we listen and when we read. You're not always going to find it super easy to use those things that you've learned in your speech unless you dedicate a little bit of time to it, right? Or unless you have been exposed to it again through repetition lots of times. That's basically what we're talking about, right? We want to get things in that active place of our head that our brain uses when we are speaking a language, which is obviously very different from writing. Okay, very different. Every skill has its own thing going on here. So the whole point here is to be a little bit open-minded with your practicing. Okay, expand your horizons when you reach a barrier. Do a little bit of research. Figure out how to say that thing that you wanted to say, how to pronounce that word that you were doubting about. Expand your horizons, okay? And learn new things. Most importantly, practice using what you're learning. So if you do learn a new thing and you want to practice using it, use it right away. That is the best way to actually remember how to use it. Obviously, in order to use things that you've just learned, we just want to make sure that we use them correctly. That means that you're going to look at a couple of example sentences before you start just throwing vocabulary in sentences, just in case that verb that you learned comes with a preposition, just in case that verb that you learned comes with two prepositions and the meaning changes. Maybe it doesn't come with anything. Maybe it's a word that comes with the word the before, or we don't need it. Whatever it is, just make sure that you've got those things clear, right? And example sentences are fantastic. You just look at that vocabulary being used, and it will not just show you grammatically speaking how it is used, but it will also show you contexts and situations in which that word or phrase that you've just learned can be used, which is also helpful. Yeah? Now, that is basically what we are on about with this live stream. Okay. Um, you can obviously go into as much detail as you want when it comes to this. Now, when you finally feel like you've gotten into the habit of using English a little bit every day, this is when you can finally move on to the next step. And instead of just saying random sentences about things that are around you, about the things that you're doing, we want to start creating mini monologues. I want you to aim for a minimum of 2 minutes, mainly so that you can get the flow. All right. But, you don't have to be super strict about it. All right. But I would suggest a minimum of 2 minutes. If you can go longer, go longer. Definitely a lot better. Now, guess what I'm going to ask you to do? Record them. Okay, I know that it sounds intimidating. Many people do not like recording themselves. It does not have to be a video. It can just be an audio. I don't know if that makes it any better. But the whole point here is that nobody has to see it. Nobody has to listen to it. It is for you. Why? because your brain, when it's speaking, is busy trying to speak English. It's busy trying to formulate sentences. It's busy trying to find the correct vocabulary. It's busy trying to figure out pronunciation. It's busy trying to do all of that. All right. And you're so concentrated on getting those thoughts into words and transmitting it that there is really not much space for much more. Okay. So, especially at earlier stages. But when you have a recording, you can finally rest after you've done your lovely monologue and listen back to it. Now you're not the speaker anymore. You're the listener. You're listening to someone using English. That someone is you. Okay? But you're in listener mode. Your brain is not sitting there struggling to get all the thoughts together and struggling to structure everything so that it makes sense. No, you're listening to what you have said. You're listening to your grammar, you're listening to your pronunciation, you're listening to your intonation, how flat your speech is, for example, or if it's not flat. You're listening to the pauses that you make. You're listening to any filler words that you throw in and maybe you want to eliminate. You're listening to the language that you're using, how you're using this language. Okay? So we look at it from a different perspective, and you can get lots of feedback when you do that. Sometimes you're going to identify some mistakes, especially if you do it on a regular basis, right? You're going to identify patterns. This is why you don't want to do it just once. If you've got 5 recordings, among those 5 recordings, I identify, for example, that I've said this word so many times. Maybe I want to look for an alternative, or even ask myself, do I know any alternatives? That's a place to start. I think the pronunciation of this word is off. Let me check it. Maybe you didn't notice when you're speaking. But you can finally slow down and break things a little bit, break things up, and actually see whether there's something you want to change or not. Because sometimes there isn't anything you want to change, and that's perfectly fine. If you've got a good enough level, odds are you might not want to change anything. That's fine. But maybe today you had a fantastic day and tomorrow you're not going to have that fantastic day. Maybe you're going to be talking about a topic that is a little bit more complicated for you and you might struggle with that topic a little bit. So you have again an opportunity to get some feedback and improve it. And when we do that, it's fantastic to do that when you are doing the formal informal transition. Also, when you want to paraphrase things, because you're going to say things once and then you're going to listen to it and say, okay, I used informal English here. Let me say the same thing in formal English. So you've got formal and informal English, and you can listen back to them and see the differences that you have used, right? That's one thing you can do, for example. So there are many different things that you can actually get from a recording. And trust me, it's a great way to improve your speaking. Okay, because when we're speaking, we're just so busy thinking about how to do it. Many times we don't actually have that space in which we can finally slow down and say, oh, well, that's not what I wanted to say. The good thing about this is that you've got insider knowledge, okay? You know what you wanted to say. You know the thought that was in your head, and you get to judge your English and say, well, that's not exactly what I wanted to say. The vocabulary that I used in that sentence, it doesn't say exactly what I had in mind. Let me look for something better. Let me explore different alternatives. Those are things that you can do when you have a recording, right? Sometimes, obviously, when we're speaking, we just autocorrect ourselves. Sometimes we stop, sometimes we think, sometimes it happens, okay? But having a recording helps you do it a little bit better. It gives you a lot more things to actually work with, let's say, right? So that's the whole point here. You can obviously locate some mistakes in the process, and if you do locate some mistakes, we want to differentiate what kind of mistakes they are. Is it a random mistake that you just made and it's just you know the correction, you don't actually make that mistake very often? That's perfectly fine. You don't have to worry about it. Maybe you were nervous, maybe you were just speaking too fast and the pronunciation of that word just went a little bit crazy. but it doesn't usually happen. Those are not the mistakes that you really need to worry about. The mistakes that you need to worry about are the ones that are stubborn, the ones that show up in one recording and the other and the other and the other and the other, even though you know it's correction. Because many times we know the correction. Many times we know, oh, that word was pronounced, it was pronounced like that, or grammar, conjugation. It's like, oh, it's I don't know. It's people are, for example, instead of people is. That's a very common mistake. Mm, so there are things that grammatically you already might know. You might know the correction of them, but they just simply don't come out when you're speaking. They don't come out correctly. That's what we're trying to identify here, right? So those stubborn mistakes, if they show up once and again and again and again, that's something you can work with. You can say, okay, well, let me try to fix this mistake. Okay, or this is something that I repeat too much. Let me try to be a little bit more creative with how I'm expressing this thing. So it's always an opportunity to say, well, to explore what you actually do say when you're speaking and to see if you want to change it. All right, if you want to change it or not. So a total yes to recording yourself. Okay. But the whole point of recording yourself, now this is very important. If you do try recording yourself, um, listen back to them soon because when you have 10 recordings, you're not going to want to listen to them. Okay, you're not going to want to listen to recording number one, which lasted 5 minutes, and then the second one you went 10 minutes, and then the first, no, many times you're just going to see it as a huge block that you're not going to want to do it. Just like me, for example, after I've got a live stream done, I look at the recording and say, wow, I've been blabbing for an hour and a half or 2 hours. Sometimes I do 3 hour live streams. I do not want to go through all of that in order to edit it, for example, or whatever it is. So I understand that feeling, and I know that it's something that's just going to pull you back. All right. So when you do have a recording, spend some time, listen to it, and take notes of the things that you want to work on. Okay, you can have it there as reference, but when you listen to the second note, you make a different column, take notes, and then you can start seeing things on paper and say, oh, I see a pattern over here. You don't have to go back and listen to the same recording again and this one and that and so. It just makes the process a little bit easier. Obviously, if you want to keep them and not delete them so that you can keep track of, let's say, pronunciation, you can keep track of your intonation, you can keep track of certain things, you can keep them, right? But it's not necessary. The whole point is to extract something that we can work on, and then we can start basically figuring out what our next step is when it comes to improving our speech, right? And you're not going to find something that you're going to work on just from the first recording. Remember that. You need to have a couple of them. But if you do find something that you want to work on the first recording, you're going to say, okay, well, I'm going to write it down. If you don't really find anything, you feel like it wasn't super useful, just let it settle. It's okay. Do a record our other speaking practice sessions, and then you come back and say, oh, I say this word too much. It clicks, it rings a bell, okay? You don't necessarily have to go back to the first recording and listen to it again, but you're going to actually see that you're going to figure out your mistakes. Many things you can fish out. Obviously, some things are going to be overlooked, right? Especially if you don't run it through someone who actually speaks the language well. But it is a very good opportunity to see how your speech looks like and say, okay, well, this is what I want my speech to look like. And my speech is not really there yet. What can I do to get there, right? So this is the most important thing. It's applicable to all of your skills in the English language. You have to know exactly where you are with a skill, whether it's listening, reading, writing, or speaking. Know exactly where you are and have an idea of where you want to be. So that way you can walk towards it. You can say, okay, so what's my next step? I want to express myself better. I'm going to learn more expressions. I'm going to learn more phrasal verbs. I want to use English in a specific way. I want to pick up British accent, for example. If you have a goal that you're going to be working towards, it's going to be so much easier for you to work towards it instead of learning things a little bit aimlessly, let's say. Okay? Again, the basics are the basics. Don't forget about your basics. And if you are at a beginner level of English or somewhere there, please do focus on pronunciation. I feel like it is not focused on a lot, and it is super important to get your pronunciation down at the beginning so that you don't learn things that are so that you don't have a flaky foundation that can basically fall later. Okay, it's so much harder to fix your pronunciation of hundreds and thousands of words that you've learned afterwards because you did not fix the pronunciation of that specific sound at the beginning, right? So always preventing is is better than having to treat it. So just keep that in mind, right? Keep it in mind because the higher you go, the more you're going to know about this language, and you really don't want to go back and have to correct hundreds of words because your pronunciation is off. So focus on your pronunciation, especially at beginner stages, right? So, what did we talk about all this time? Well, first thing you need to do, start with the things that you enjoy, start with things that surround you. We're going to start with things that are in our immediate surroundings to initiate our speaking practice, right? If you want to talk a little bit more one day, that's perfectly fine. You want to cut it short another day, that's perfectly fine. All right? The thing is that if you don't like what you're practicing, odds are you're not going to want to practice a lot more and you're going to get frustrated. And we don't want that, especially at the beginning. This is why I told you keep things simple. Simple at your level, yeah? If you have an advanced level of English but you're still not fluent, no, do not go back to the basics. Simple at your level as much as you can, okay? So we do that. We're going to keep things simple. We're going to have a nice plan for those days in which we're just simply not so motivated, like narrating our day or talking about future plans or talking about things that we've already done, expressing our emotions in that moment. If you journal, by the way, you'll find this so much easier. And remember that writing is fantastic because when you write, you give your brain more time to think about how to phrase things. You give your brain time to think about, yeah, do I want to use this word or that word? Mm, and you also give your, well, after you've actually written, you can also see that you structure things in a specific way. Because if I want to talk to you about a certain topic, ideally I would introduce that topic to you, even if it's not a wholly introduction. We're looking at least some kind of introductory phrase so that I don't jump in the middle of the topic and start talking about it and you're just going to sit there looking at me blankly right? So some kind of structural organization is important in our speech, especially if you're doing exam prep, okay? So writing will help you do that. Writing will naturally help you. Okay, well, I'm going to start with this, and then I'm going to move on to this topic, and then I'm going to talk about this, and I'm going to wrap it up in the end with this. Okay, so if you are actually in the habit of writing, writing will help your fluency because it helps you structure things a bit better, and it also gives you more time to incorporate some of that vocabulary and grammar that you might not be using in your speech, right? So, but always remember that, especially at the very, very beginning, whether it's speaking, listening, reading, or writing, start with things that are somewhat enjoyable for you. Because if you don't do that at the beginning, English is going to seem like an obstacle. It's going to seem like, this boring thing that I have to do. Depends on how you're learning it, of course, but and what you're learning. But we want to keep things a little bit enjoyable, especially if these things that you're doing are things that are, let's say, that you are going to weave into your routine, right? Maybe you go to class, you have a teacher, but you want to get some speaking practice in, regular speaking practice in your own time. So make it a little bit enjoyable. When you watch movies, watch things that are enjoyable for you. Watch a genre that you actually enjoy, right? Same goes for books. If you pick up a book, make sure that it's something that you would enjoy reading. Um, so it's the same about, the same goes for many things here. But this is, let's say, it's very important at the very first stage. It's when you're not really used to using English from the first place. You're already struggling with the language, and that's probably why you're here, right? So we want to ease things. We want to build that foundation. Remember that the first stage is the messiest stage, but the more you keep practicing, the better you're going to get, okay? But the whole point here is to be consistent. And in order to be consistent, there has to be some kind of joy in the process, something that will tell you, oh, yay, I've got to practice English today. Maybe it might not be that exciting, okay? But at least it won't be like, oh, I have to speak English today because if not, I'm not going to get fluent. We don't want those kinds of feelings because maybe one day you might just kind of get around it the other day and but if you feel like that on a very frequent basis, odds are you're going to drop it altogether at some point. So make sure that whatever you're doing resonates with you in some way. All right. Even if it's not like, oh, I'm going to talk about super happy things. Even if it's, okay, today I learned um, how to complain to my boss about something that's going on in my work. You're going to see progress. What we're looking for is progress that actually makes you feel good. Okay. So this is why we want to personalize things just a little bit at the beginning so that you have that pull. You're going to want to keep doing this. When things get hard, you have a reason to keep going. That's what we're looking for, okay? Until you get the habit down. When you get the habit down, you can just do whatever you want. You can expand your horizons wherever you want. If you want to dive deep into a specific topic, develop your skills there, you can totally do that. Even if it's not super interesting, even if it's English because let's say English for work. You might not be super enthusiastic about it, but it is important to you and your career, for example. So you're going to put in the effort, but let's make things, especially at the beginning when you're training your brain to think in English, we want to start with the foundation that we've built already up till your level. So the basics, the things that are not too hard for you to express, the things that will naturally come out little by little. And the more you practice, the better you're going to get. All right. So remember that sometimes you're going to get frustrated in the process. Sometimes it's not going to flow. That's normal. It's just part of the process. And many times you're going to make mistakes too. But keep practicing. Nonetheless, keep practicing. It's the most important thing. All right. So those are just a couple of things that you can do. And when you're looking at things in your personal life, you can ask yourself, well, what do you like, for example? Let's say today. What can you talk to me about today? Do you like sports? Tell me about yesterday's match. Was there a match yesterday? I don't know. Tell me about a match that you watched. Talk about sports that you do, for instance, or why do you enjoy it? Talk about the frequency. If you follow some athletes, talk about those athletes. Do you like gaming? Well, do the same for that. What do you play? What's the objective of the game? What's the goal? How far are you in it? How about documentaries, for example? Describe what you've seen. Was it about natural landscapes? Was it about animals? What did you learn? Are there any places you'd like to visit? Are you passionate about music, for example? Talk about that too. What genres do you listen to? Artists, bands, which ones do you love? Which ones do you hate? Name a few songs on your playlist. How do they make you feel? Do they make you feel motivated? Do they make you feel a little bit depressed, melancholic? There are so many things that you can talk about, you see. Do they make you want to dance? So, those are the kinds of things that I want you to start drawing from who you are, all right? Because odds are when you meet a person, you're going to talk about those things, aren't you? So it's not going to be 100% useless. When you're introducing yourself and you actually meet something like, oh, you play the guitar too? That's fantastic. And you're just going to start rambling. Things click. And they click because you have similar interests, right? So it's a good thing to practice these kinds of things, right? Things that basically make you who you are, right? You, not me. So remember to do that. There are so many topics that you can talk about. But as a bonus tip, um, don't just describe things. try to express your opinion. So I know, yeah, maybe you're talking about a song or a movie or something. You can say what happened in that movie, mm, but I also want your opinion about it. What does that movie make you feel? Do you like it? Do you not like it? Would you recommend it to other people? Maybe a specific age group, or people with specific interests? Talk about your feelings, whether they're positive or negative or even neutral. Or maybe you have mixed feelings and you might be like, yeah, well, I'm kind of on the fence here. That's perfectly fine. Express that too. So the whole point here is to practice our expression, okay? Even with things like, okay, well, maybe you just watch the news. You can obviously tell me what you watch. Maybe you just read a chapter of a book. You can obviously describe whatever happened in there, but you can also draw it from a personal lens and say, okay, well, this is my opinion. This is what I have to say about this topic or about this chapter, what I think is going to happen next in the book, for example, or what's going to happen to that character. And that character, I don't like that character. There's something very strange about them. It's fishy. Talk about it. You're going to explore so many things, and it's fantastic. The places that you can go if you just let yourself go there. Okay? Now, when you've been doing this for a while, obviously at some point you might feel like you ran out of topics to talk about. Okay, so that is important to acknowledge. At some point, especially if you've been doing it for a good couple of months or maybe even years, there is a point in which you're going to just sit there and say, so what do I talk about? Okay, it becomes more burdening at that point to practice because you have to look for a topic. Maybe you need to do some extra preparation in advance. Um, so, what I'm going to share with you guys right now, and this is the last thing I'm going to share about this, um, is let's say a few flexible things, a few flexible cues that you can use on a regular basis. Okay, so that basically means yes, you can use them once and again and again and again. Why? Because if I ask you the same thing, if I ask you, for example, check the news, odds are you're going to have something different to talk about today than what you talked about 1 week ago, for example, or 1 month from now. And there are also different types of news, right? We can talk about, let's say, technology. Let's figure out the technological advances that we've got lately. We can talk about politics if you want to talk about politics. You can talk about sports. There's so many different things that you can talk about, right? So you'll have something different to talk about from that same question every single time you do it, right? Those are like, I like to call them joker cards. So there are a good bunch of cues that will basically help you when you're stuck in a rut, and we don't want that. Okay, you can write each of them down, for example, on a piece of paper and put them in a bowl or some kind of place and just pick one when you're not feeling very creative. And that's just as easy as you can make it for yourself. You can keep them in a notebook and just choose one. You can be creative with how you want to do this. Okay, so first thing, is what I've just brushed on. What is trending on the news? Give your opinion about it. Okay, so that's one joker card that you can just put in that little fishbowl that you're gonna keep. Search for something that is trending. Talk about it. You can describe it. You can also talk about different perspectives, right? So let's say, for example, obviously depends on the news that you're watching, right? But sometimes things are biased. They're coming from one direction. What if we flip it and actually see how things look from a different perspective? You can do that too. So, another thing, what's the last thing you bought? It can be from Amazon, it can be from an actual store. How was it? What was your, was it what you expected it to be if you ordered something online? Talk about the quality, talk about the price, talk about the delivery speed, whatever you want. That's just another example. The last thing you bought. Last many things, as a matter of fact. The last restaurant you ate at, the last hotel you stayed in. Be creative with this. There's so many different things that you can do, right? Last place you visited, last vacations. Oh, the list goes on. Now, another thing, describe what you see. Okay, whether you're on a bus, if you're walking in your neighborhood, if you've got a dog and you're walking your dog, for example, even if you're at home, you can even find a photo on Google if you want to, take it up a notch, and describe it. What I want you to do is describe what you're seeing, say what you think about what's happening, for example, if it's a photo or if there's something happening in front of you and you're watching it. Try to get in that habit of being able to describe things that you say. Okay, so sometimes they're going to be very basic things, but sometimes interesting things happen. And it's actually as easy as fetching a photo from Google. As a matter of fact, if you guys use social media, odds are there's something to comment on, right? We all come across very strange videos every day. It doesn't even have to be a strange video. You can just find a video and say, okay, well, I love this video because of that. Um, that's perfectly fine, and it still counts because again, we're expressing our emotions, we're expressing our thoughts in English. Okay, the more you do it, the easier it's gonna get for you to just do it in English automatically without having to translate from your native language to English. Maybe at the beginning you're going to need to translate a little bit, and that's fine, but we want to reduce that translation a little bit. We want to become more, let's say, a little bit more free, a little bit more independent with our English language. And you can also give a review about something. Could be anything. Restaurant, a movie, a book, the service of something that you've hired. It could be a hotel, it could be I don't know, any different service. So you can also give a review. When we give reviews, we structure them a little bit differently, right? And a cool thing to play around with here is if you give that review, you can obviously leave a review online, right? But if I went to a restaurant and the service was terrible, or the food was terrible, or it's overpriced, the way I would talk about that to my friend would be different from the way I talk about that situation to the waiter themselves or the manager, for example, if you were there. At the hotel, same thing. There's something wrong with your room. You might pick up the phone and tell your friend, "Goodness, this room is absolutely terrible." Blah 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 blah. And the way that you're going to express yourself in that situation might look a little bit different from the way you're going to express yourself when you go downstairs to reception and tell the receptionist, "Well, you see, this is what's going on." So it doesn't have to be drastically different. Yeah, many times it's not very different. But sometimes there are variations. Sometimes there are situations in which we want to be a little bit more professional, a little bit more formal. But other times we don't, and that's perfectly fine. So that's also something that you can play around with, like a little bit of role playing. We'll talk about role playing on our next live stream, as a matter of fact. So remember that we've got these kinds of cues, right? They're cues that you can repeat once and again, and hopefully your answer will change from one thing to the next, right? From one time you use it to the next time you use it. So remember that if you are feeling lazy or if you're feeling stuck with your speaking practice, you don't have to make things overly complicated. Just simply talk about something that resonates, what you did during the day, what you're going to do over the weekend. Take one of the cues that I just talked to you guys about right now. We all complain about things too that are bothering us, things that are in our head, things that we can't stop thinking about. You might as well try and do that in English, see how it goes. So those are just all ideas to get you started. Little by little, you'll get used to using English in a more automatic way. You're going to get used to using our collocations. You're going to get used to using English in a natural form, the way native speakers use it, not the way that you would use it if you were to translate every single thought from your native language to English, because sometimes they just that process, it just doesn't work well. All right, so you're going to be able to nurture your English language, develop the skills that you need, and speak more naturally, speak more comfortably, be more confident with your speech, and obviously more fluent, right? That's the whole goal. So remember that the things that I just talked to you guys about today is a little bit more, let's say, There are a couple of techniques that really just don't take that much time. Those are the things that I did. Well, some of these things I did when I came to Spain and I really realized I needed to boost my fluency because there was just no other way to live in this country, at least in my city. So it was the kind of thing that I actually started doing. The first thing I started doing, by the way, was the shopping list one. Looked at my shopping list and I said, okay, this is something that I keep every single week. Every single week I go to the supermarket and I buy stuff, so I might as well try to make sentences in English, try to talk about that stuff in English, not names, not just talking about vocab, I'm talking about expression. Okay, that's what I started with. And then little by little, I started finding other things that worked for me. So try things, see what works, stick with that. See what doesn't work, maybe you don't even need to do it. You can set it aside, you can try to use it when your English gets better, for example, or you can not use it altogether because it doesn't work for you as a learner, which is perfectly fine, right? But the whole point is to be open-minded in the sense of I'm going to explore different ways to keep boosting my fluency and I'm going to stick to those. All right. Things that are a little bit more constructive, things are that might be a little bit that might take a little bit more time to develop because they're more passive, for example, whatever it is. But the whole point is that if you are consistent with your practicing, you're going to get where you want to go. All right. And odds are you're going to get there before you even know it, which is a fantastic feeling. You're just going to look back and say, wow, my English has changed a lot. It's fantastic. I can express myself a lot better. I feel ready to do, let's say, to go for a job interview in English, or maybe even work in English altogether, or to travel, whatever it is that you've got in your mind, right? So, out of all of these strategies, and there are so many tips that you can also find online, by the way, the only way that you're really going to improve your speech and fluency is by actually speaking. Okay, so just don't forget that because there's so many things that you can do in your head. I can sit here and just stare at something and think about it in English. But that's good because you're training your brain to use the language, but we still want to get the sounds out, right? Vocalize. And we also want to practice a little bit connected speech, especially if you are at a higher level. Right? That's when we'll start looking at connected speech when we don't say one word then the other. We're going to connect them little by little and it will fall in naturally. But you need to speak in order to do that, and you ain't going to do that in your head before that, okay? So we want to use every opportunity we've got to actually speak out loud. Yeah. And that's what I'm going to wrap up with for today. The key is consistency and actually opening your mouth to speak. Okay. First couple of times, it's not going to sound fantastic. I know. But trust me, if you stick to it, you're gonna get to places. Obviously, feel free to ask me any questions on my live streams, even though I tend to deal with very, very specific topics. But in the end, well, I'm here to help you. And today, what we looked at is weaving speech and training your brain into our routine. I will talk to you guys about more strategies and techniques on my next live stream because when it comes to speaking, honestly, there's so many things. So let's just say that that today's live stream was a little bit about how you can do it to weave it into a routine that is already stacked with things. So people who are super busy and just need a way to boost their fluency, you can use the things that I talked about today and see if they work for you. All right. And on my next live stream, the techniques that I'm going to talk about will probably require just a little bit more time and effort. Okay, so we're just going to go down that road little by little. We're going to expand, and that's what I'm going to leave you guys with today. So thank you so much for being here, and I'll see you next week. Bye bye.